Hi, everyone. My name is David Haas. I'm with Technion, and joining me today is Claudia Imhoff. And we are going to talk about testing for BI environments. Oh, look at that. We already have a scratch. Let me scratch that and start over. I thought I changed that on here. Didn't I say that?
Say what?
I thought I changed our title on here. I've got testing for business. Oh, I know why. It's the PowerPoint that I didn't say.
Oh, need to save it.
Get that one. Okay, here we go. Testing for analytic environments is what we say.
There you go.
All right. Oh gosh, you should feel pretty good. Took me one sentence and I'm doing a retake already.
a do-over.
All right, I got it. Hi, everyone. My name is David Haas with Technion. Today, we're talking about automated testing for analytic environments, and I'm so happy to have Claudia Imhoff with me today. Claudia, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a quick intro to yourself and a little bit about what you've been doing these days.
Oh, gosh. Well, how about if I start at the beginning when I started doing technology way back? That was several decades ago. But I went to work for a large software development company. And I came in as a system tester. That was my job. And we built big systems for telecom companies, massive systems that did all the order entry and the billing and the collections, the whole bit, very complex systems. So being a system tester gave me the view of the entire system. And I really enjoyed it because a programmer only got to see his or her program. I got to see the whole system and how everything had to work together and so forth. I had to understand everything about the business, how they functioned and so forth. So it was a really wonderful job. I guess I did a good job because I got promoted to a system test team leader at this company. At the same time, though, there was a fellow that worked for the company. His name was Bill Inman. How about that? And Bill Inman decided to have a class on decision support systems. That's what we called them way back when. Over the weekend, it was a Friday, Saturday, and a Sunday. You can't be unbillable too long. And I decided, what the heck? I don't know anything about these things. I'm new to the company. I'm fresh out of school. I'm used to learning new things. Let's go. So I went, and there were probably, 8 or 10 of us in this weekend class. And it was Bill's first attempt at explaining basically BI and analytics and data warehousing. We didn't have those terms, but that's what it was. And at the end of the class, I talked to Bill. I went up to him. I was the only one out of the 8 or 10 that actually followed up with him. And I said, this is fascinating. I would really like to continue doing this. This is something that's pretty cool. So as much as I loved system testing, and believe me, I did, it was a fascinating world as well. This one kind of spoke to me. So I got, be careful what you wish for, you'll get it eventually. And sure enough, after I had finished my project on this big telecom company software, I was invited to my very first data warehouse. At that time, I became a data modeler for the data warehouse environment. And you know what? I took to it like a duck to water, and I never looked back. I have enjoyed a wonderful career in BI, in analytics, and all of the componentry and technology that is supporting those environments. I enjoyed it so much that I have to mention one other thing. I was very lucky. I was able to implement data warehouses for a number of years. And then I switched from being an implementer to somebody who taught people how to build it. I got kind of tired of doing it for them, and I decided it was good if I taught them about it. And I also got very fascinated with the incredible technology, the technological revolution that was going on in the analytics industry. So I actually became more of an industry analyst. I was analyzing the vendors, analyzing their technologies, guiding them, giving them advice, writing white papers and thought pieces about where this industry was going. And I was very lucky to get that. The problem, though, is that that's really a hard place to reach if you're an independent analyst like I am, or an independent consultant like I was. So I formed something, pardon me. I formed a group. It's called the Boulder BI Brain Trust. It's at the very bottom of my bio. And I created it because I thought, this isn't fair. I shouldn't be the only one, the only independent analyst, or a handful of us, that got interviews with vendors, that got briefings with vendors, that got to see the technology. So I created the BBBT to open it up to anybody that's an independent analyst, consultant, or practitioner who wants to know more about the technology. So what we did was we brought in vendors and we got them for 3 hours. That's a pretty deep dive. We got to see demos. We got to see customer case studies. Some of them even brought in their customers and had them present to us. Still ongoing. If you are an independent analyst or consultant or practitioner, by all means, it's free to you. Please join bbbt.us. So that's kind of the crown on my career. I'm very proud of that group. I'm very proud that I can open it up to anybody that wants to understand the technology in our world. So system testing all along has been one of my key points of pride as well, but so has analytics. So that's kind of me.
Perfect. Thank you, Claudia. Let's start at the very, very top, and let's just define what testing is for analytic environments. Let's start there.
Well, I'm going to turn the tables a little bit, and I'm not going to be the only one talking. I want to hear from you, Dave. You
Perfect.
are deeply enmeshed in testing, all kinds of testing. So I'm going to turn the tables and ask you, what's your definition of testing?
So sadly, I'll start with just saying that testing is something that is thought of last. And I know we're going to talk about the timing for when testing should be done, but there's often very little thought that goes into testing. And what our experience has been, specifically with Validator, which we can talk a little bit more about as well, but our experience has essentially been that there is an enormous amount of energy that goes into building models. There's an enormous amount of energy that goes into thinking about the types of business intelligence that is needed across an organization. But when it actually comes down to testing the quality and understanding if the data that's powering all of these is actually correct, that is probably one of the biggest issues that we see over and over and over again. So to define testing, I would say that really we need to think holistically in terms of what's the data we need, who's using the data, and how are we actually making sure that the data that's being used is actually the correct data, and that users are getting the information that they need, it's repeatable, and it's actually accurate. How's that?
That's perfect. And I'm just going to add to that a little bit. I said I started out as a system tester because and it was wonderful. I got to see end to end. Not individual pieces, but how did the entire process flow through a system. That's the same thing with business intelligence and analytics. It's a system, and it's a very complex system. And if you can't see end to end, if you can't, I'm so with you on this. If you don't understand the system, the data flowing through it, the analytical assets that are being created, the processes of ETL and data quality and so forth and so on, that whole thing needs to be tested every time you touch that system, right? Every time you bring in a new chunk of data or new sets of analytic results or whatever it is, that upstream and downstream relationship needs to be tested. And that's what you're talking about. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, again, focus on the project and maybe doing a test of the project rather than a test of the system. And boy, I think that's that's a disaster waiting to happen. That's my take on it.
So when you say it's disaster waiting to happen, one of the, I guess the second part of this question I'll ask is, why should we bother thinking about testing? Like what's the downside to this? I mean, we create a model, we go out there, we build this great thing, and hey, we're eventually going to find the errors. What's the downside to not building a testing plan?
Well, it would be the same thing as not testing that big, massive telecom system. Who's going to find the errors? Who do you
Right.
think's going to find the errors?
Your
If it
users.
isn't tested, yeah, if it
Right.
isn't tested, it's going to be the business community that goes, what the heck is this? It just glitched, it stopped, it's given me bad data. It's not working the way I thought it should work. And that is a major problem today in analytic systems. If we don't test the impact of a small change, did it change something downstream from us? Did it screw up somebody else's analytic results, giving them, maybe it won't work? And that would be the best scenario, is if all of a sudden what they were relying on away and didn't work anymore. That's a clear indication that there's a problem. But even worse, what if it continued to work, but it wasn't working properly? How would they know? I mean, that's almost worse, isn't it? To get an analytic result and think that it is based off of the same thing that it was before, working like a little top, but in fact, it isn't. And that's oh my gosh, think about what that does to the business community's psyche. Now, all of a sudden, they don't trust the system. Now, all of a sudden, something that was reliable is no longer reliable. They ask a question on Monday, they ask the same question on Thursday, and they get two different answers. Well, who do I believe? So to me, testing of the entire thing is probably the best thing you can do to make sure that people do understand that this is still the same system you thought it was. It's working the way it should be. We've just added new features or functions. There was no impact, or if there was an impact, we corrected it. The performance has been tested. We know that it's still performing the way it should be. All those things that we certified before as being a trusted KPI or a trusted piece of ETL or an algorithm that we know works still works, right? And of course, the second challenge is what you mentioned, and that is that unfortunately, testing is not as valued as it should be. And I think it should be top of the list, not bottom of the list. Unfortunately, a lot of project managers see it as a bottleneck, something that slows them down. Mm-hmm. As opposed, it's kind of like governance, it slows them down instead of something that is absolutely necessary and in fact puts the shine on that apple that you just created.
Great points. When we ask our clients and folks that we work with about their challenges with data, there's typically the two most common that I hear over and over and over again are, number one, it's a root cause of just not being able to access the data they want, not being able to get to the data they want. But the second one that we hear over and over in that same vein is, we don't know if the data is any good and we don't trust it. And if we don't trust it, all of this work that's been done is for naught because they're just not going to use it, right?
No, they're going to go build their spreadsheet and put the data that they trust into their little spreadsheet instead of using the multi-million-dollar system that we've created for them. Okay, that was a waste of money.
So let's talk about the challenges of testing. What are some of the big challenges that you hear over and over again? And what are some of the things that perhaps could be used to address those challenges?
Well, I think one of the things that I hear a lot is we don't know what to test. How do we test this system? What kind of test plan should we be setting up? That whole idea of what should be tested is really a difficult thing to answer. And the answer is, of course, you test everything, but that's not a good answer. It's not something that people can readily sink their teeth into and understand what needs to be done. But basically what we're looking at is that stream of data from source to ultimate target, whether it's an analytical asset or it's a dashboard or a report or whatever it is. We need to test those streams throughout, those processes throughout, that ultimately end up with that analytical asset. And that means creating a test plan that tests everything. It's not just the flow of the data, but it's also the performance of the flow of the data, the performance of someone creating an algorithm and launching it. Is that algorithm performing within the performance parameters that we thought it should? Or is there something wrong? Again, so we have to test the end-to-end, not just the new stuff. Impact analysis is probably one of the best tools that we can use to understand what this change has done to the system. And being able to track and understand impact analysis is not a simple thing. Now, the good news is we now have technologies like we have data catalogs and we have monitoring capabilities. We have things that give us data lineage like our ETL tools and so forth. We can now track data from its inception as a source all the way down to every single algorithm that uses it, every single report, and so forth and so on. And we can test the impact of changes. And that's probably the best thing that we can do in terms of testing the system. But I have to stress again, it's much more than just testing the new data that's coming in. It really is testing whether something else has been screwed up by us putting something new into this environment. I'm curious about your thoughts on that as well. What should we be testing?
Well, I think that, and I'm going to steal something that you said to me when we were rehearsing and thinking about topics and what would be most valuable for the audience. I think, and I go back just to thinking about the designers that I've worked with and the folks that are actually writing the code. And, there's this, you had mentioned this, there's this ownership, right? This feeling of, well, my code is perfect. There's nothing wrong with my code. Why would I take the time or have to put in time to test? And the reality of it is that nobody that does this writes perfect code, right? Some are very, very good. They're exceptional at what they do, but it's very difficult, especially in an end-to-end system that has a large number of sources, that has data that's changing constantly, that has a team of people that are making changes. And it's almost impossible to predict what that wily business user, right, is actually going to query and ask for. And that really resonated with me. So I've stolen that from you, but that to me, I think is one of the big things that we have to address, right? And think about in terms of testing, because it needs not to be an afterthought, but something that's done as part of the process when you've made change to your code.
Yeah, that wily business user. Let's talk about them a little bit. One of the things that needs to be tested is what can they do that'll break the system? They may be wily in their own little areas, but it's astounding to me how many naive users get themselves into a whole world of hurt because they did something that they didn't know they did, I guess. For example, one of my very first projects had to be shut down for a while because the user launched a never-ending query. Absolutely, a never-ending query. It just went on, and we didn't know how to stop it. We didn't have the brakes. We didn't even have the ability to monitor the system to realize, this has been going on for 2 days. What in the world did this person do?
Imagine if that was in the cloud. Imagine if that had been in the cloud.
Yeah, just keep going. What the heck? We're just going to use these resources. And what finally clued us into something that something was wrong was the fact that performance fell to its knees, because unfortunately it wasn't just one user who had a never-ending query. It was a handful. So that really impacted the performance of the entire system, and everybody was complaining at that point. Well, then we had to put on our forensic hats, right, our little Sherlock caps, and go find these rogue queries that and kill them. Just, I'm sorry, we had to kill your query. It's not going to run. So then we figured out that, again, part of the system testing is that we had to go figure out where these rogue things were going on, how to kill them off, and how to stop them to begin with. Maybe it was training for the end users. Maybe it was some kind of a stopwatch thing that said, look, if a query is run for 6 or 8 hours, it's going to be flag and we're going to go in and investigate it. So those are the types of things that in some ways you don't learn until after you do turn it loose into the wild.
I think one of the real positive things to think about is we all know people that are brilliant, but not technical people, right? And you might call that person like a naive user, right? But someone that's not in tune with how things are built sometimes is your very best person to actually go out and test, because they're the ones that are going to create the infinite loops and the infinite testing, right? Problems that get addressed. Well, let's dive right into that then. What do you see as some of the impacts from not developing a comprehensive test plan? What are some of the things you see that are results, right, of not doing a good job building a test plan?
Yeah, I'll go back to something that I said earlier. The analytic environment must be trusted. It must be thought of as being a trusted set of data, the same kind of data that I would have picked or I would have cleaned up or I would have used as a business person. And the impact of not testing or worse, having problems that are detected by the business community as opposed to the people creating the environment is just a lack of trust. And with a lack of trust goes along with they're not going to use it. The adoption rate goes down, or they spread the word that, hey, the data is no good, or these algorithms are producing bad information. And as soon as that's something that is very hard to recover from, almost impossible. You got one shot at a good reputation, right? And if you lose that reputation, it's really hard to get it back. So I think that would be my biggest fear of not testing a system, is I would lose the trust of the business community.
Exactly. So that kind of leads us into where, in your view, where in the project lifecycle should you be thinking about testing?
Well, just like anything else, system test, as soon as you have 2 programs, you have a system, or at least a part of a system. The individual programmer can debug their program, and they do a good job of that. But the interface between programs, or the streams of programs, as soon as you have more than one, you got a system, and that's where you need to start testing. Are these things interfacing correctly? Is the data flowing absolutely correctly? And then, of course, you bring in the case of an analytic environment, one of the key tests is the data quality test. Is the data what we thought it was? Are there nulls where there shouldn't be nulls? Are the dates okay? Are the codes in line with the codes that we know, and so forth? So data quality is probably the kind of a DNA of the project itself. I think you said that, so I'm going to steal from you. And I'd like for you to explain a little bit more about how you see data quality as this DNA factor.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be ingrained from the very, very start. I think the big thing that I see that so many folks don't employ today or don't embody as part of their process is this idea of, okay, we'll handle testing when it gets to production, right? And that is just it's such a huge mistake. You need to think through when you're in the dev stage, right? When you're in the architectural stage, when you're thinking about compliance, when you're thinking about data quality, all all of that should be thought through and actually tested in the dev stage, not when you actually land in prod.
Well, and that brings up another thing that I saw so often, because an analytic environment doesn't follow a traditional operational system methodology. It doesn't. It's not a waterfall methodology. It's an iterative one. We test something, we put something out, we see if it works, we bring it back. It's a back and forth kind of iterative type of situation. And because it isn't traditional waterfall, people thought, well, I don't need the traditional environments either.
Right.
I have my development environment. We'll just pop that baby right into production instead of following the traditional. And please, I emphasize this to your listeners, don't get rid of a testing environment. Just because it doesn't follow waterfall doesn't mean you don't need those three environments: development, test, production. Make it a formal 3 sets of environments. Developers put their programs into the test environment. The testers test the systems end to end. And once they're satisfied with it, then it goes into production. So again, I think one of the things that we lost along the way in building out our data warehouses and data marts and so forth was this idea of formal testing and having a formal testing environment. And boy, oh boy, like I said, disaster waiting to happen.
That's so true. Let's dive in there from there then to the types of things that probably should be tested.
Yeah. Well, I'll start and then I expect you to finish. How's that?
I'll drop in as well. That sounds
Absolutely. Well, of course, stress testing. If 100 people hit the enter key at the same time, what's going to happen to that environment, right? Stress testing. Security tests. This is, again, it's not an operational system, but it doesn't mean that security is just loose. It's not. This is pretty critical information and a lot of sensitive information that you sure as heck don't want to get out into the wild. So there's all kinds of security testing that has to be done. Performance testing of the ETL programs, of the data quality programs. How well are they performing and so forth. Even the user execution tests, who's running what queries, what types of queries. Like I said, did somebody launch a never-ending query? Sounds like a song. A never-ending query, a big bad query, you know? Who isn't running the queries that perhaps they should have been running? Are there guardrails in place for our more naive users, if you will? Are they trying somehow to compare apples and oranges and they don't know that they're comparing apples and oranges? Can we monitor, and that's a part of testing, is to monitor the system. Can we monitor the system to see if there's anything going on that, you know, maybe it shouldn't be? Are people using data in ways that are questionable? I ran into this on one of my situations. We had a pretty mature data warehouse up and running for one of my clients, and one user started to download all of the customer information. And boy, if we hadn't had a monitoring system on that, we never would have known it. But all of a sudden, flags went up all over the place. Why is this guy downloading all of our customer data? He doesn't even use customer data that often. Well, sad to say, he was about to leave the company. And he was about to because once you download it, right, it's on your PC. You can get a little thumb drive and you can put it, and out you go, right? He was about to leave the company. And I don't know, I'm not going to tell you who the company was because that's, you know, that's not something you do. But I suspect things like that have happened in many companies. We could not have been the first. But if we hadn't had that ability to see what was going on, to monitor that system, we never would have caught it. Never would have caught him, and he would have walked out with all the customer data. That's a terrifying scenario, and it keeps me up at night.
That's a great story. Yeah, it shows that you had the right things in place, and you obviously tested to make sure that if something like that happened, you'd be alerted to it. I
Yep.
guess you would ask me to add, and I guess I'll add my 2 cents around data quality, and specifically around increasing the trust in the data through the use of automation. And I'm going to ask you about automation in a moment, but I think the thing that we find just so powerful here at Technion is giving users the ability to actually automate a discovery, profiling, and testing, and monitoring, as you talked about, of your data assets, and specifically around the metadata. But that really is more of a product discussion around a product that we offer called a validator. But I think that's the big one that we tend to focus on, really, is how can we help users make sure that the quality of data is there? How can we make sure that tests that they've created at one point are still actually being run, and ensuring that errors that were found early, maybe years prior, aren't cropping back up and resurfacing. So kind of let me use that as a segue. Let me ask you, kind of why automated versus manual testing in a environment.
I was thinking about this after our rehearsal, going back to my early days as a system tester, and how painful it was back in those days. Keep in mind, this was a couple of decades ago. How incredibly painful it was to be a system tester, because you had to manually create your tests. You had to manually run your tests. And in many cases, you had to manually analyze the results of your test. And then if something changed, you had to go back and manually change everything to fit in the new change or whatever it was. And it was, I don't know, a little frustrating. It seemed like there must be an easier way to do this. I just kept thinking that at the time. And I think that's where you guys come in. A validator is an automated testing environment. And it's like, oh, if I could have only tested the data quality over and over with the same test, just launch it, let it do its thing, and at the end, I would pick up the results and run with it. Wouldn't that have been a marvelous plus to my day? So I think in some ways, that's what automation does. It's not the drudgery of creating these manual things over and over. And it also ensures that you're going to repeat the test. Sometimes I might have forgotten a manual test, just got busy and skipped right over it, went to another one. Well, with automation, it's going to automatically run the tests that you tell it to run every time. And I find that to be a great blessing right there. Just run the same set of tests and show me the results. So that's
right,
where I
think be done.
Yeah. That's where you come in. So talk a little bit. You got to talk a little bit about Validator, and now's your time.
Yeah, for sure. So if you have not been exposed to Validator before, check it out. It's validator.com, but it's basically a tool that's designed to improve data quality, increase trust. And it does that essentially by automating discovery, profile, and testing. You write, as Claudia, as you just had said, you basically write your SQL query once, and it then is there in the system to run over and over and over again to automate. I think the big, yes, finally, right? The other big piece that it's leveraging is the metadata, right? Which is so important for data governance. So you've got metadata, you've got profiles, and you've got testing, all automated, simply done, saving you time. And this kind of circles back up to, I think, what we talked about at the very beginning, is that now really, is there an excuse with tools like Validator out there? Is there an excuse not to test? If we can automate it and it can do this, is there really an excuse? I don't think so.
I can't imagine that what excuse are they going to use? Oh, I forgot to hit the button. I don't know.
Well, I appreciate the chance to talk about Validator, but let me ask you a couple more questions, because I know we're running short on time. who should do the testing? We talked about testing. We've talked about why it's important. We talked about the benefits, the pitfalls of not doing it. But who should you enlist to actually test your beautiful system?
I'll go back to my days as a system tester. The best people that we had on that team were people that came out of the business. They were not necessarily the technical folks or the programmers or that sort of thing. They weren't DBAs. They weren't coders. They were business people, and they understood. They understood the business. They understood what the system should be doing. They could write the scripts because they knew what the processes were. They knew how things worked. In an analytic environment, I would love to see somebody that understands how businesses use analytics. I would love to have somebody that does understand ETL, at least to the point where they can test the ETL program. Maybe they can't write SQL as well as the coders can, but they sure do understand it. As a tester way back when, I had to climb into code. So I had to understand, whoa, that didn't work the way it should. Let me go walk through this code. Yes, I was a debugger as well as a system tester, but I could point to that and I could bring it to the programmer and say, here's the problem that you've got in your program. It's screwing up the system. It's sending bad data downstream. So those are the types of people that I would love to have. Somebody that understands the business domain, somebody that does have enough technical knowledge that they can point to the problem and point it out to the person developing the system, and those people that can manage the overall process end to end. Those are the people you want on a system test team.
We should be looking at who consumes the data and give everyone a chance to actually participate in the process, because those wily users, you never know what they're gonna actually do. Well, this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Claudia, for spending time together and sharing your wisdom around testing and understanding this analytic environment. So I hope this is helpful for everyone and appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. You made me go back into the Wayback Machine, and it was so nice to think about those memories of the days when I was a system tester and a test lead. Thanks so much, Dave.
Talk soon.